You are breathing right now. You have been breathing every moment of your life, approximately 25,000 times today. And there is a very good chance that almost every single one of those breaths has been wrong, not slightly off, not suboptimal in a technical sense. Wrong in a way that is quietly, cumulatively, measurably reshaping your face, degrading your sleep, dysregulating your nervous system, elevating your anxiety, reducing your athletic performance, and shortening your healthy lifespan. One breath at a time. James Nestor is not a doctor. He is a science journalist who became obsessed with a question that no one in conventional medicine seemed to be asking. If breathing is the most fundamental function of the human body, the one we perform more than any other, the one that stops and life ends, why does nobody teach us how to do it correctly? Why is there no breathing curriculum in schools? Why do dentists treat the crooked teeth and nobody asks why the jaw stopped developing correctly in the first place? Why do doctors prescribe sleep apnea machines and nobody asks why the airway collapsed? He spent a decade in the archives of ancient medical texts, in the laboratories of Stanford researchers, in the field with free divers and breathing masters and pulmonologists, and what he found was both alarming and completely liberating. The most powerful tool for transforming your health, your nervous system, your energy, and your mental state has been available to you every moment of your life. You just have not been using it correctly. That tool is your breath. And today we are going to change that permanently. Welcome to the Vitality Edit by CosmiReads. Video 3. We have been building something across this series, layer by layer, system by system. Van der Kolk showed us in The Body Keeps the Score. How trauma lives, not in the mind, but in the body, in the nervous system, in the tissues, in the breath patterns that freeze when we freeze. Walker showed us in Why We Sleep, how the brain cleans itself, consolidates memory, and regulates every hormonal system in the body during the hours we spend unconscious, and how catastrophically everything unravels when those hours are compromised. Nestor now arrives with the piece that connects both of them, because the breath is the one physiological system that sits at the precise intersection of the voluntary and the involuntary, the conscious and the unconscious, the mind and the body. You can breathe without thinking, but you can also choose how you breathe, and that choice, made 25,000 times a day, is either compounding your vitality or quietly eroding it. Swart showed us in The Source that every deliberate practice physically changes the neural architecture of the brain. Nestor shows us that every deliberate breath changes the chemistry of the blood, the state of the nervous system, and the structure of the face and airway over time. The breath is not a background process. It is the most accessible, most immediate, most continuously available health intervention you will ever have, and it costs nothing. Before the science, a moment with Nestor himself, he did not arrive at this subject through wellness culture or breathing workshops. He arrived through a choir. He had developed a chronic respiratory condition, and his doctor, somewhat reluctantly, suggested he try a breathing class. He resisted. He went, and something happened that he could not explain through any framework he had available to him at the time. His breathing changed, and then his health changed, not marginally, significantly. He became obsessed with understanding the mechanism. That obsession took him into the archives of ancient Indian pranayama texts, into the research of Carl Stau, who had transformed emphysema patients with breath retraining in the 1960s, into the laboratory of Stanford, where he and a colleague performed a 10-day experiment on themselves, blocking their noses completely and breathing only through their mouths to document what mouth breathing actually does to the human body. What they found was so alarming that the experiment was stopped early. Every measurable health marker deteriorated. Snoring increased by 4,820%. Sleep apnea appeared in participants who had none before. Blood pressure rose. Heart rate variability fell. Cognitive function declined. In 10 days, from breathing through the wrong hole in their face, that experiment and the decade of research surrounding it became Breath, the most important book about the most overlooked function of the human body. The first key insight is the one that reframes the entire conversation about breathing, and Nestor states it with the same directness that anchors this entire series. We have forgotten how to breathe. Not as individuals who have made poor personal choices, as a species. Over the past few hundred years, the human diet has softened dramatically. Processed foods require less chewing, and less chewing means less jaw development, and less jaw development means smaller mouths, and smaller mouths mean crowded teeth and narrowed airways. The crooked teeth that orthodontists straighten are not a genetic defect. They are a dietary and developmental consequence. And narrowed airways mean that millions of people spend every night of their lives struggling to breathe, snoring, experiencing microarousals, cycling through partial apnea, without ever being told that the root cause is structural and that structure can be changed. Nestor's research across ancient skulls confirms what modern anthropology has quietly known for decades. Pre-industrial humans had wide jaws, straight teeth, and open airways, not because they were genetically different from us, because they chewed harder food throughout childhood, developed their facial structures fully, and breathed almost universally through their noses. The first correction is the simplest and the most immediately available. Close your mouth. Breathe through your nose, not sometimes, always. Chloe was a 36-year-old primary school teacher who had been a mouth breather her entire life. She had snored since childhood, suffered from chronic sinus congestion, and had been told by her GP that this was simply how her anatomy was configured. She read Nestor's first chapter and taped her mouth shut at night for the first time, a practice Nestor documents extensively, and which sounds alarming until you understand that nasal tape is specifically designed for this purpose and is used by sleep researchers worldwide. The first morning she woke up without the familiar, thick-headed grogginess that had been her daily baseline for as long as she could remember. Not dramatically rested, just clearer. She continued for 30 days. Her snoring ceased almost entirely according to her partner. Her morning anxiety, which she had attributed to personality, reduced significantly. Her afternoon energy, which had always crashed reliably at 2 o'clock, stabilized. She had changed nothing about her diet, her sleep schedule, her exercise, or her stress management. She had changed only the hole through which she breathed for 8 hours every night. The transformation was not miraculous. It was mechanical, and it was available to her the entire time. The second key insight is the one that Nestor calls the most important discovery in the entire book. And the research behind it is so consistent across so many independent studies that it is remarkable it has not become standard medical teaching. Breathe less. Breathe slower. The optimal breathing rate for the human body at rest is approximately 5.5 breaths per minute. The average modern human breathes between 12 and 20 breaths per minute. We are chronically overbreathing. And chronic overbreathing, taking in more air than the body actually needs, has consequences that cascade across every physiological system. It depletes carbon dioxide levels in the blood. And this is where the counterintuitive science lives. Carbon dioxide is not simply a waste product to be expelled as rapidly as possible. It is a signaling molecule that determines how efficiently oxygen is released from the blood into the cells and tissues that need it. The Bohr Effect, discovered in 1904 and somehow still absent from most clinical conversations, states that hemoglobin releases oxygen more readily in the presence of carbon dioxide. When we overbreathe and deplete our CO2, the oxygen in our blood becomes less available to our tissues, even as our blood oxygen saturation registers as perfectly normal. We are oxygen-rich and oxygen-starved simultaneously. Slower breathing restores CO2 balance, improves oxygen delivery at the cellular level, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, lowers heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and produces a state of calm, alert focus that no supplement, no meditation app, and no pharmaceutical has ever matched in the clinical literature. The magic number Nestor returns to again and again is 5.5. 5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. One breath every 11 seconds. Try it right now as you listen. Notice what happens. Annika was a 41-year-old corporate lawyer whose anxiety had been the background weather of her professional life for 15 years. She had tried therapy, medication, meditation apps, yoga, and a long list of supplements. Some helped, none transformed. She read Nestor's second chapter and began practicing what the research calls coherent breathing, 5.5 breaths per minute, for 10 minutes every morning as a replacement for her usual scrolling in bed habit. She used a simple app that provided a visual pacer. The first week felt mechanical and slightly frustrating. By the second week, something had shifted in how she arrived at her desk, not calmer in a dulled sense, calmer in a sharpened sense, the specific quality of alert ease that she had previously only experienced on the best days of a holiday. She began practicing for 5 minutes before any significant client meeting or court appearance. Her colleagues began asking what had changed. She had not changed her preparation, her research, her hours, or her legal strategy. She had changed the rate at which she breathed for 10 minutes every morning and 5 minutes before every high-stakes moment. The nervous system, Walker taught us, regulates everything. Nestor shows us the most direct lever for regulating the nervous system. It is the breath. And the breath is always with you. The third key insight is the one that most directly connects Nestor's research to the nervous system science that van der Kolk laid out in The Body Keeps the Score. And it is the one that will resonate most deeply with anyone who has ever felt stuck in a stress response they could not think their way out of. The breath is the only autonomic function you can consciously control. Your heart rate, your digestion, your immune response, your hormonal cascades. These are all autonomic. They run beneath conscious control. You cannot decide to lower your cortisol the way you decide to raise your arm, but you can decide how you breathe. And because the breath is directly connected to the vagus nerve, the primary communication pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system, a change in breathing pattern produces an immediate, measurable physiological change in nervous system state. This is why every ancient contemplative tradition on earth has a breathing practice at its center: pranayama, tumo, holotropic breathwork, the Wim Hof method, the Sufi practice of dhikr, the Christian hesychast tradition. They are not different spiritual technologies producing similar effects through mysterious mechanisms. They are the same physiological technology, voluntary manipulation of breath to shift autonomic nervous system state, dressed in the language of different cultures across different centuries. Van der Kolk showed us that trauma freezes the nervous system in patterns of hyper or hypoarousal that resist cognitive intervention. Nestor shows us the physiological bypass, the direct route into the nervous system that does not require the thinking brain to agree, cooperate, or understand. You breathe differently. The nervous system shifts. The body follows. Fatima, a different Fatima from any you may have heard in previous videos, was a 33-year-old nurse who had been working in a high-acuity ward for 8 years and had developed what she recognized as a chronic, low-grade stress response that she could not switch off even on her days off. She could not fully relax. She could not fully sleep. She felt a persistent background hum of readiness that had been useful in the ward and was exhausting everywhere else. She began practicing extended exhale breathing, a technique Nestor documents extensively, in which the exhale is made deliberately longer than the inhale, activating the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system through vagal stimulation. 4 seconds in, 6 to 8 seconds out. She practiced for 5 minutes at the end of every shift before getting into her car. Within 2 weeks, the commute home had transformed from an extension of work mode into a genuine transition. Her body had learned, through the breath, through the vagus nerve, through the parasympathetic activation, that the shift was over. She told me it was the first time in 8 years that she had arrived home feeling like herself rather than like a slightly deflated version of the nurse she had spent the day being. The fourth key insight is the one that takes Nestor's framework furthest into territory that sounds almost impossible until you read the clinical evidence, and then sounds not only possible, but inevitable. The structure of your face and airway is not fixed. It continues to change throughout adult life in response to the mechanical forces applied to it. Specifically, chewing harder foods develops the jaw. Nasal breathing develops the sinuses and maintains the structural integrity of the airway. Mouth breathing allows the structures to collapse inward over time. And the research Nestor documents on adults who have deliberately changed their breathing patterns, combined with targeted chewing exercises and specific nasal practices, shows measurable changes in jaw structure, airway diameter, and sinus capacity within months. This is not orthodontics. This is epigenetic expression responding to mechanical input. The same plasticity that Swart described in the neural architecture of the brain exists in the facial and airway architecture of the body. The structure you inhabit right now is not the structure you are permanently assigned. It is the structure that has been shaped by the mechanical inputs it has received, and it will continue to respond to the mechanical inputs it receives from this point forward. This is perhaps the most radical idea in breath, that the crooked teeth, the small jaw, the collapsed airway, these are not destiny. They are developmental history, and developmental history, unlike genetic destiny, is responsive to intervention. Mei Ling was a 29-year-old architect who had worn orthodontic braces twice, had her wisdom teeth removed at 22, and had been told by 3 different dentists that her jaw structure was simply too small for her teeth. She read Nestor's 4th chapter and began what he calls myofunctional therapy, a combination of tongue posture correction, nasal breathing retraining, and targeted chewing exercises using harder foods and purpose-designed chewing tools. She committed to the practice for 6 months with the same methodical discipline she brought to her professional work. At her next dental appointment, her dentist, who did not know about the practice, remarked unprompted that her bite had changed and asked if she had been wearing a retainer. She had not worn a retainer. She had changed the mechanical forces applied to her facial structure every day for 6 months through the deliberate choices she made about how she breathed and what she chewed. The body, van der Kolk taught us, keeps the score. Nestor adds the corollary. The body also reads the new score you write for it. Every breath is a vote for the structural environment you inhabit. 25,000 votes per day. The compounding is inevitable. The 5th key insight is the one that ties Nestor's entire framework together and connects it to everything the Vitality Edit series has been building. The recognition that breathing practices are not a wellness trend. They are the oldest and most clinically validated health technology in human history. And the specific techniques that produce the most dramatic physiological effects are both simple enough to begin today and profound enough to transform every other health practice you already have. Nestor documents 3 specific breathing practices with the most robust clinical evidence. Coherent breathing, 5.5 breaths per minute, for cardiovascular health, nervous system regulation, and anxiety reduction. Extended exhale breathing, longer out than in, for immediate parasympathetic activation and stress recovery. And intermittent hypoxic breathing, deliberately reducing oxygen through breath holds, for metabolic health, red blood cell production, and the specific physiological adaptation that elite athletes have always known as altitude training, now accessible to anyone willing to practice breath retention safely. Walker showed us that sleep is the foundation upon which every other health intervention rests. Van der Kolk showed us that the body must be included in any genuine healing process. Nestor shows us that the breath is the hinge, the practice that improves sleep, that regulates the nervous system that carries trauma, that changes the structure of the airway that determines sleep quality, that activates the parasympathetic state that makes healing possible. The breath does not supplement the other practices in this series. It underpins all of them, and it is available to you right now in this moment, with no equipment, no cost, and no prerequisite except the willingness to pay attention to something you have been doing unconsciously your entire life. Priya, a fresh character and a yoga teacher of 12 years, had been teaching breathwork to students her entire career without fully understanding the physiological mechanisms beneath the practices she had always known worked. She read breath and described the experience as having the scientific skeleton placed inside something she had always known was alive, but had never been able to fully explain to the skeptics in her classes. She redesigned her teaching completely. She began explaining the Bohr Effect to her students before teaching the slow breathing sequences. She explained the vagal mechanism before the extended exhale practices. She explained the myofunctional research before addressing tongue posture. Her student retention doubled. Her referral rate tripled. Not because the practices had changed, because her students now understood why the practices worked, and understanding the mechanism, Swart showed us, deepens the neural consolidation of every practice it accompanies. The breath, Priya told me, was always the technology. Understanding the engineering made it undeniable. 5 ways to apply breath to your vitality practice right now. 1. Tape your mouth tonight, not with duct tape, with medical-grade mouth tape or the specific sleep tape Nestor recommends, available at any pharmacy. Breathe through your nose for 1 full night of sleep. Notice what is different in the morning. This single intervention has more clinical support for improving sleep quality than most sleep supplements on the market. 2. Practice coherent breathing for 10 minutes tomorrow morning. 5.5 seconds in through the nose, 5.5 seconds out through the nose. Use a breathing app pacer or simply count. 10 minutes. Notice the quality of alertness you arrive at your day with versus your current baseline. 3. Practice extended exhale breathing for 5 minutes before any high-stress situation this week. 4 seconds in, 6 to 8 seconds out. Before the difficult conversation, before the important meeting, before the moment that usually triggers your stress response, let the breath shift your nervous system state before the situation can shift it for you. 4. Audit your default breathing pattern this week. Set a phone reminder 3 times per day. When it goes off, notice how you are breathing. Through your nose or your mouth, fast or slow, shallow into the chest or deep into the belly. The awareness alone begins to change the pattern. What you observe, you can influence. 5. Begin the 25-day mouth taping and nasal breathing challenge Nestor documents. Nasal breathing exclusively, day and night, exercise and rest for 25 days. Track your sleep quality, your energy levels, your anxiety baseline, and your exercise recovery. The clinical evidence for what changes in 25 days is remarkable. Your 7-day breath challenge. Day 1. Tape your mouth tonight and note what is different in the morning. Day 2. Practice 10 minutes of coherent breathing at 5.5 breaths per minute before anything else. Day 3. Audit your breathing pattern 3 times using phone reminders, nose or mouth, fast or slow, chest or belly. Day 4. Practice extended exhale breathing before one high-stress moment today, 4 seconds in, 6 to 8 seconds out. Day 5. Eat something harder than your usual diet, raw vegetables, harder fruits, foods that require genuine chewing, and notice the jaw engagement. Day 6. Practice 5 minutes of nasal-only breathing during a light walk or exercise session that you would normally perform with mouth breathing open. Day 7. Sit for 10 minutes in silence, breathing at 5.5 breaths per minute, and notice the state you arrive in. Read your Vitality Edit journal entries from the past 7 days. Notice what has shifted in your body, your sleep, your energy, and your baseline nervous system state. Drop 1 word in the comments that describes what changes when you breathe correctly for the first time. Just 1 word. I read and reply to every single one. Breath is not the most glamorous book in the Vitality Edit. It does not promise to reverse aging or decode your trauma or rewire your brain. It makes a quieter and more immediate promise. It promises that the most fundamental thing your body does, the thing it has been doing since your first moment and will do until your last, can be done better. and that doing it better changes everything. Van der Kolk showed us the body keeps the score. Walker showed us the brain restores itself in sleep. Nestor shows us the breath connects them both, and that the bridge between your nervous system and your health has been available to you in every single moment of your life. Start using it now. Hit the like button if this series is changing how you inhabit your body. Subscribe and hit the bell because video 4 of the Vitality Edit is coming, and we are going deeper into the biology of what your body is capable of when you stop working against it and start working with it. Your free downloads are in the description. Thank you for being part of CosmiReads. Manifest, read, rise. See you in the next one.